The morning of March 17, 1943 started like any other over the Belarusian countryside. Captain Viktor Petrov gripped the controls of his Yak-9 fighter, the engine's roar drowning out everything except the hammering of his own heart. At 24 years old, he'd flown 32 combat missions. This would be his last. The German Messerschmitts came out of the Sunday. Victor never saw them, until tracer rounds tore through his left wing like hot knives through butter. The cockpit filled with smoke. Oil sprayed across his goggles. His fighter pitched violently to the right, spiraling toward Earth at 300 kilometers per hour. Through the acrid haze, Victor could see flames licking at the fuel lines. He had seconds, maybe less. His instructor's voice echoed in his mind. A burning plane is a coffin with wings. Victor yanked the canopy release. The wind hit him like a freight train, ripping away his breath, his goggles, nearly his consciousness. He tumbled through the freezing air, watching his aircraft, his loyal companion through so many battles, cartwheel toward the forest below in a shower of burning metal. At 2,000 meters, he pulled the ripcord. Nothing happened. Panic seized his chest. He pulled again, harder this time, feeling the cable resist. Then, a violent jerk that nearly snapped his spine as the parachute finally deployed. But something was wrong. Victor looked up to see 3 panels of his chute torn away, bullet holes from the same burst that had killed his plane. He was falling too fast. The ground rushed up to meet him. Victor could see everything with terrible clarity. A dirt road, a wooden fence, a frozen pond, reflecting the pale morning sky. He braced for impact, tucking his legs, protecting his head. The collision drove the air from his lungs and sent lightning bolts of agony shooting up his left leg. He tumbled across a snow-covered field, the damaged parachute dragging him 20 meters before finally collapsing. For a moment, Victor lay still, cataloging his injuries. Sharp pain radiated from his ankle, broken or badly sprained. His ribs screamed with every breath. Blood ran from a gash above his eye, freezing in the March wind. But he was alive. Then he heard the dogs. Victor's blood turned to ice. German search parties always brought dogs. They'd have seen his chute. They'd be here in minutes. He tried to stand and immediately collapsed, his leg buckling beneath him. Looking down, he saw his left ankle had already swollen to twice its normal size, the boot leather straining against the injury. He dragged himself toward a nearby tree line, each movement sending fresh waves of nausea through his body. Behind him, he heard engines, motorcycles, or trucks, he couldn't tell. The barking grew louder. Victor reached the first trees and pulled himself behind a fallen log, his breath coming in ragged gasps that formed white clouds in the frigid air. Through the branches, he watched a German patrol emerge onto the field where he'd landed. 6 soldiers with 3 dogs straining at their leashes. They'd found his parachute. An officer was pointing, shouting orders, directing his men to spread out. Victor's service pistol held 7 rounds. Not nearly enough. As the Germans began sweeping toward the forest, Victor noticed something else. A thin trail of smoke rising from beyond a nearby hill. A farmhouse. Where there was a farm, there might be a barn. Somewhere to hide, maybe even someone who could help. But between him and that smoke stood 200 meters of open ground. And the dogs were getting closer. Victor made his decision. Using a broken branch as a crutch, he began dragging himself through the snow, away from the approaching patrol. Every step was agony. Every movement left tracks a child could follow. Behind him, he heard a shout. They'd found his blood trail. The barking intensified. Victor looked at the smoke rising peacefully into the morning sky, so tantalizingly close yet impossibly far. His leg throbbed. His vision blurred. The voices behind him grew louder, accompanied now by the mechanical click of rifle bolts being drawn back. He was out of time. Then, through the trees ahead, Victor saw something that made his heart skip. Not the farmhouse, not yet, but something else. Something that would change everything. An old red tractor, abandoned in a snow-covered field. Victor half ran, half crawled toward the tractor, his injured leg leaving a crimson trail in the snow. The German voices were perhaps 100 meters behind him now, the dogs frantic with the scent of blood. He reached the machine and pulled himself up onto the rusted metal seat, his hands trembling from cold and shock. The tractor was ancient, a 1,930 seconds. Soviet UTZ-80 model, its red paint faded to pink, one tire flat, the engine cowling held together with wire. But the key dangled from the ignition. Victor turned it. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. Behind him, a dog burst through the tree line, its handler 20 paces behind. The German raised his rifle. Victor turned the key again, pumping the throttle desperately. The engine caught with a belch of black smoke. He threw the tractor into gear just as the rifle cracked. The bullet sparked off the metal fender inches from his hand. The tractor lurched forward with agonizing slowness, barely faster than a man could walk. Victor hunched low as more shots rang out, bullets whining past his head. He steered toward the farmhouse, the old machine grinding and shaking beneath him. Then he saw her. A woman stood in the farmhouse doorway, maybe 50 years old, wearing a heavy wool coat and a threadbare scarf. As Victor approached, she didn't run. Instead, she stepped forward, eyes fixed on the German soldiers emerging from the forest. "The barn!" she shouted in Russian, pointing. "Quickly!" Victor swung the tractor toward a large wooden structure beside the house. The woman ran ahead, throwing open the heavy doors. He drove inside, and she slammed the doors shut behind him, dropping a thick wooden beam across them just as fists began pounding from outside. "Aufmachen! Open up!" German voices commanded. In the sudden dimness, Victor could see the barn was full of farming equipment, rusted plows, hay bales, coils of wire, and tools hanging from the walls. The woman looked at him with fierce, intelligent eyes. "I am Katerina Volkov," she said. "My husband and sons are at the front. How badly are you hurt?" "My ankle," Victor gasped. "I can't walk. They'll kill you for hiding me." The pounding on the door grew more violent. A voice shouted in broken Russian, "Send out the pilot, or we burn the farm." Katerina's jaw set. She moved to a window and called out, "I am alone here. An old woman. I have no pilot." "We saw him. We followed his blood." Victor looked around desperately. The barn had no back exit. They were trapped. In minutes, the Germans would break through or simply set fire to the building. He'd survived the crash only to die in a barn, bringing death to this brave woman who'd tried to help him. Then his pilot's eye caught something. Hanging from the rafters were dozens of old metal milk cans. Against the wall stood sheets of corrugated steel roofing, chains, a welding torch, boxes of bolts and rivets. And in the corner, Victor's breath caught 3 jerry cans marked with Wehrmacht eagles, fuel, probably scavenged from destroyed German vehicles. An insane idea began forming in his mind. "Katerina," he said urgently, "do you know how to weld?" She looked at him as if he'd lost his mind. "My husband taught me to repair our equipment." "Why?" "Because I'm going to turn your tractor into a tank." Outside, the Germans were bringing up an axe. The first blow splintered the door. Victor worked with the desperate speed of a man with nothing to lose. While Katerina welded sheets of corrugated steel to the tractor's sides, he bolted milk cans filled with dirt across the front improvised armor that might stop rifle bullets. They chained more steel plates to protect the engine and wrapped the driver's seat with a hay bale covered in sheet metal. The door was giving way, splinters flying with each axe strike. Victor fashioned firing ports by cutting slots in the armor. Then he spotted an old pitchfork heavy, steel-tined, with a 2-meter handle. He lashed it to the front of the tractor with wire and chains, creating a brutal ram that extended forward like a lance. "Are you insane?" Katerina whispered, sparks flying from her welding torch. "You'll never break through them." "I don't need to break through," Victor said, loading his pistol. "I need to make them scatter. In the confusion, you run to the forest. There's a partisan group 3 kilometers north. Everyone knows this. Find them. Tell them what happened here." "And you?" Victor looked at the monstrous machine they'd created. A farm tractor transformed into a medieval war beast, bristling with metal plates and armed with a pitchfork lance. It was ridiculous, impossible, insane. It was also his only chance. The barn door exploded inward. German soldiers poured through the opening, rifles raised. Their officer stepped forward, confident and smiling. Then Victor started the engine. The roar filled the barn like a dragon's bellow. The Germans froze, staring in confusion at the metal-clad monstrosity emerging from the shadows, smoke belching from its exhaust, the pitchfork lance gleaming in the morning light streaming through the shattered door. Victor gunned the throttle and aimed straight at them. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the officer's eyes widened in disbelief. Zurich. Back. Back. The soldiers scattered like startled crows as Victor's fortress on wheels thundered toward them, slow but unstoppable. The pitchfork caught one man in the shoulder, spinning him aside. The tractor's bulk smashed through what remained of the barn door, tearing it from its hinges. Victor emerged into the farmyard like something from a nightmare, a smoke-belching, metal-plated war machine that had no business existing. Bullets sparked off his improvised armor as he swung the tractor toward the German vehicles parked by the road. Behind him, he glimpsed Katerina sprinting toward the forest. Good. At least she'd survived this. Now came the hard part, staying alive long enough to make his madness matter. The Germans had numbers. They had training. They had automatic weapons. But Viktor Petrov had rage, desperation, and a tractor that refused to die. He steered toward their motorcycle, deliberately crushing it beneath the tractor's massive wheels. Metal screamed, and glass shattered. A soldier raised his rifle, aiming carefully at the firing port where Victor's face was visible. Victor fired first. The German fell. The officer was shouting orders, trying to organize his men, but they were scattered across the farmyard, caught completely off guard by this impossible adversary. Victor swung the tractor's rear end around, using it like a weapon, forcing two soldiers to dive for cover. But he was slowing down. The tractor's engine sputtered. One of the fuel lines had been hit. Victor could smell gasoline mixing with smoke. One spark, and his improvised tank would become his funeral pyre. A German soldier jumped onto the side of the tractor, trying to reach through a firing port. Victor smashed his pistol butt into the man's fingers. The soldier screamed and fell away. The officer had regrouped his men. They were taking cover behind their truck now, firing in controlled bursts at the tractor's weak points. The tires, the exposed engine parts, anywhere the improvised armor didn't reach. Victor felt the machine shudder as a tire exploded. He was losing mobility, losing fuel, losing time. Then Victor saw something that changed everything. The German truck, their transport vehicle, sat with its engine running, packed with ammunition crates. The officer had positioned his men behind it for cover, not thinking about what would happen if. Victor turned the dying tractor toward the truck. The officer understood too late. His eyes went wide with horror. 9! Away from the truck! Get away from... Victor aimed the pitchfork lance at the truck's fuel tank and pushed the throttle to maximum. The tractor crawled forward on its ruined tire, grinding and shrieking, but still moving. 20 meters. 15. The Germans were running now, abandoning their cover. 10 meters. Victor jumped. The pain from his injured ankle was nothing compared to the survival instinct that launched him off the moving tractor. He hit the ground hard, rolled, and scrambled behind a stone well just as the pitchfork lance pierced the truck's fuel tank. The explosion turned morning into noon. The shockwave rolled over Victor like a physical force, stealing his breath. Heat washed across his back. When he dared to look, both the truck and the tractor were engulfed in flames that reached 10 meters into the sky. Ammunition in the truck's cargo bed began cooking off, bullets zinging in every direction like angry hornets. The Germans who'd been near the truck were down dead or unconscious. Victor couldn't tell. The surviving soldiers were in full retreat, running back toward the road where their motorcycles had been parked. But Victor wasn't done. He'd seen something in the barn, something he'd noticed but hadn't had time to use. Now, dragging his injured leg, He limped back through the smoke and flames. The barn's far wall was on fire, but what he needed was still intact. Katerina's husband had been preparing for spring planting, which meant Victor grabbed the crate of dynamite, old unstable mining explosives that farmers used to clear stumps and rocks from their fields. He stuffed sticks into his coat pockets, grabbed a coil of fuse, and hobbled back outside. The remaining Germans had reached their motorcycles and were trying to start them. Desperate to escape before whatever madman had destroyed their patrol came up with something else. Their officer was screaming into a radio, calling for reinforcements. Victor had perhaps 10 minutes before the Wehrmacht sent everything they had. He lit a stick of dynamite, judged the distance, and threw. His aim, honed by years of calculating trajectories and bomb drops from a fighter cockpit, was perfect. The explosive landed directly between the motorcycles. The blast sent twisted metal and burning fuel in every direction. When the smoke cleared, the German patrol was finished. No vehicles. No communications. Just a few dazed survivors stumbling away across the fields. Victor collapsed against the stone well, his ammunition spent, his body broken, watching the farmhouse and barn burn. Everything Katerina had owned, everything her family had built, was being consumed by flames because she'd chosen to help a downed pilot. He'd won the battle, but at what cost? Then Victor heard something that made his blood freeze. Not German voices. Something worse. The distant rumble of tank engines. Not one or two. Many. A full German armored column was approaching along the main road, probably the very force the officer had been trying to reach by radio. They'd seen the smoke. They'd heard the explosions. And they were coming to investigate. Victor had no ammunition, no weapons, no way to run. He looked at the remaining sticks of dynamite in his coat, then at the road where the tanks would appear. A smile crossed his battered face, the kind of smile a man makes when he's already decided he's dead and is just choosing how to make his death count. If he was going out, he'd take as many of them with him as possible. But then, from the forest, came voices. Russian voices. Katerina emerged from the tree line, but she wasn't alone. Behind her came 30 partisan fighters, men and women in mismatched clothing, armed with captured German weapons, their faces hard with the knowledge of what occupation meant. Their leader, a grizzled man missing 2 fingers on his left hand, surveyed the burning wreckage of the German patrol. Then he looked at Victor, still clutching his dynamite, sitting against the well like some mad prophet of destruction. "You," the partisan leader said slowly, "are either the bravest man I've ever met or the craziest." Victor started laughing, a slightly hysterical sound that he couldn't quite control. Can't it be both? The rumble of approaching tanks grew louder. The partisan leader's expression turned grim. "Katerina says you turned a farm tractor into a weapon. Can you do it again?" Victor looked around at the burning ruins, the scattered tools, the abandoned equipment. His pilot's mind, the same mind that had designed the improvised tank, began working. "Give me 30 minutes, he said, "and I'll show you what a desperate man can build." The partisan leader checked his watch. "The tanks will be here in 20. Victor grinned through the blood and soot covering his face. "Then I'd better work fast. 20 minutes. 20 minutes to create a miracle." The partisans scattered across the ruined farm like a hive of purposeful bees. While Victor drew frantic diagrams in the dirt with a stick, they hauled equipment from the burning barn. Anything that might be useful. 2 more tractors, older and smaller than the first. Chains, more corrugated steel, barrels, and most importantly, the remaining crates of mining explosives. "Listen carefully," Victor said, gathering the fighters around him. "We can't fight tanks directly, but we can control where they go." His plan was insane. It violated every rule of warfare. It would probably kill them all. The partisans loved it. They worked with the desperate efficiency of people who knew death was 15 minutes away. Victor directed them like a conductor leading an orchestra. This group digging. Pits across the road. That group wiring. Explosives. Another team, using the tractors to drag fallen trees into position. "Deeper," Victor shouted at the diggers. Katerina appeared at his side, her face smudged with soot. "The Germans shot my home to pieces," she said quietly. "Let's return the favor." 10 minutes left. The rumble of tanks was now accompanied by visible dust clouds on the road. Victor could make out individual vehicles, 4 Panzer III tanks, at least 3 armored cars, and trucks full of infantry. A full company, maybe 100 men, against 30 partisans, a crippled pilot, and 3 farm tractors. "Positions!" Victor shouted. The partisans melted into the forest on both sides of the road. The tractors, now barely recognizable under layers of dirt, branches, and camouflage, sat at strategic points that looked like natural obstacles. Victor himself took position in the lead tractor, its armor now just dirt-filled sacks and hope. The trap was set. The German column approached cautiously, their commander clearly suspicious after finding the destroyed patrol. The lead tank stopped 30 meters from the farmyard, its turret swiveling to survey the damage. Victor held his breath. "Come on. Just a little closer." The German commander clearly decided the threat had passed. Whatever had destroyed his patrol was long gone. He ordered the column forward. The lead panzer rolled directly over the first concealed pit. The tank lurched violently as its right tread dropped into the hole, the pit's edges collapsing under 30 tons of steel. The tank couldn't move forward or back exactly as Victor had planned. That's when he gave the signal. The partisan hidden in the tree above the stuck tank dropped a satchel charge directly onto the engine deck. The explosion wasn't enough to destroy the Panzer, but it shattered the engine compartment. Smoke poured from the tank as its crew began abandoning vehicle. The German column immediately went into defensive formation, textbook response to an ambush. The other tanks spread out, machine guns sweeping the forest. Infantry dismounted from their trucks, taking cover. They were looking for hidden soldiers with rifles. They weren't looking for the tractors. Victor started his engine and burst from concealment, smashing through the camouflage. But this time, he wasn't attacking. He was running, if you could call the tractor's agonizing crawl running. The Germans saw him immediately, a sitting duck, an easy target. The second Panzer's turret swung toward him. The commander probably relieved to finally have something concrete to shoot at. The tank fired. The shell went exactly where Victor had predicted, through the tractor's cab and out the other side, missing Victor by inches because he'd already jumped off, rolling behind a pre-positioned pile of rocks. But the shell continued through the tractor. Through the camouflaged load Victor had packed in the rear, 50 kilograms of mining explosives wrapped around scrap metal. The sympathetic detonation created a shaped charge effect that sent a column of shrapnel directly back toward the tank that had fired. The makeshift projectile didn't penetrate the Panzer's armor, but it didn't need to. The explosion was just a trigger. The real trap was the chain reaction. Victor had positioned all 3 tractors in a triangle around the German column, each one loaded with explosives and angled to direct their blast inward. When the first exploded, it triggered the second. Then the third. The farmyard became a crucible of fire. The Germans had trained for many things they'd fought in Poland, France, and the vast expanses of Russia. But they'd never trained for an enemy that turned tractors into cascading mines, that used their own tactics against them, that fought with the desperate creativity of people defending their homeland. The surviving Panzers tried to reverse, but the road behind them was blocked by their own vehicles. The armored cars attempted to flank through the fields and immediately bogged down in the muddy ground Victor had deliberately flooded using broken water pipes. The partisans, from their concealed positions, picked off infantry with methodical precision. In 15 minutes, it was over. 2 tanks destroyed. 2 captured with their crews surrendering. The armored cars abandoned. More than half the German infantry dead or captured, the rest scattered into the countryside. A single downed pilot and 30 farmers had destroyed a German armored column. Victor sat against the stone well, the same place where he'd made his stand hours earlier, and watched the sun set over the ruined farm. His ankle was swelling again. Probably needed a real doctor. His ribs definitely needed attention. He was fairly certain he had a concussion, but he was alive. Katerina brought him water from the well, the only structure still standing. Around them, Partisans were salvaging weapons, ammunition, and supplies from the captured vehicles. "They'll send more," she said quietly. "Probably a whole division next time." "Probably," Victor agreed. "But we'll be long gone. And the story will spread." He was right about that. Within a week, every partisan group in Belarus had heard the tale embellished and exaggerated, with each telling of the pilot who turned a tractor into a tank. Within a month, German convoys approached every farm with extreme caution, never knowing if civilian equipment might explode into violence. Within a year, Soviet engineers were actually studying Victor's improvised armor designs for inspiration. The partisan leader approached, holding a captured German radio. "Command wants to know your name." For the record, Victor thought about it. He thought about his squadron, probably mourning him as dead. He thought about the war that would grind on for 2 more years. He thought about this burned farm and the brave woman who'd risked everything to save a stranger. "Tell them," he said finally, "that a farmer destroyed that column. Just a farmer protecting his land." Katerina smiled the first time Victor had seen her smile all day. The partisan leader spoke into the radio, giving Victor's squadron information so they could verify he'd survived. Then he turned back to Victor. "Can you walk?" "Not well." "Good enough. We're moving at dawn. There's a field hospital 30 kilometers north. Then we'll get you back to your unit." He paused. "Unless you'd rather stay with us? We could use someone with your particular talents for creative destruction." Victor looked at the wreckage surrounding them. The destroyed German equipment, the burned buildings, the evidence of what desperation and ingenuity could accomplish. A part of him wanted to stay, to keep fighting this impossible, improvised war. But another part of him remembered the feel of a control stick in his hand, the freedom of open sky, the purpose he'd felt before gravity and Germans had brought him down. "Get me to that hospital," he said. "Fix my ankle, then get me to an airfield." "You want to fly again?" After all this, Victor looked up at the darkening sky, where stars were beginning to appear. "A tractor's impressive," he said, "but it can't do this." He spread his arms wide, mimicking wings, and for a moment, despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the horror of the day, his face transformed with the pure joy of a man who'd been born to fly. 3 months later, Captain Viktor Petrov returned to his squadron. His injured ankle never fully healed. He'd walk with a slight limp for the rest of his life. But it didn't affect his flying. He shot down 16 more German aircraft before the war ended, survived when so many of his comrades didn't, and lived to see his grandchildren born in a free country. But whenever people asked about his most successful mission, he never talked about his aerial victories. He talked about a farm, a brave woman named Katerina, and a red tractor that, for one impossible day, became more dangerous than any tank the Germans possessed. Because sometimes, Victor would say with that slight smile his grandchildren knew so well, the most powerful weapon isn't the one you're given. It's the one you build from whatever you have at hand, when there's no choice but to fight.